awesome to be with you guys. I'm Matt. I've been on holidays. I'm one of the pastors here. It feels weird to be back. Is my mic going all right? Or have I messed it up, Mark? It's on? Well, I mean, I can talk loud without it. I don't have any problem projecting my voice. But no, it's awesome to be with you guys. On my holiday, I had a bit of fun. I got to go up to the coast, so I have one of my best friends lives up in Nambour, and it's really nice. And you can see that's not his bathroom, but his bathroom did look a little bit like that. He needed help renovating. So I went up and offered my services. If you know anything about me, I'm horrible with tools, but I can break things really well. So I got to break lots of tiles, but it was lots of fun. But one of the things that surprised me with this renovation that we were doing is just how messy things became. Like, you think when you go there, you're going to start tidying up, but we just created more and more and more mess. And then it was hot as well because it was right before New Year's, and Nambour is a really hot place. And there was just messiness coming. And then it was funny, while I was up there, it was the start of my holiday. So in my mind, I was like, yes, I get to switch off. This is going to be good. I'm going to help a friend out. And then I'm going to start putting my feet up. You know, it's been a big year, time to relax and recoup. And at this same time, life got messy. Oh, my clicker's not going to work now, watch. Oh, it does. So at the same time, life got messy for me. I'd love to tell you that my holiday was great, that everything was smooth sailing, but it wasn't. God had another curveball for me. And I guess when life gets messy, I started asking, how do we not become constantly overwhelmed? Because when life gets messy, there's not a magic wand to fix problems. I mean, I wish there was. I wish there was something, some prayer, something we could do, but lots of times as we get older and some of the complexity that life brings, there's not a magic solution. And some days it can feel a bit much. So how do we keep moving forward when life gets messy? And sometimes the messiness that comes can be like when I was helping my friend renovate and I'm breaking tiles. It's mess that we create. But then sometimes the mess just happens around us. Like my friend, we tried to get his son to help put up these broken tiles. That was not a good idea. Should not have done that. So then there is messiness there. So sometimes the mess can come in two ways. But I want to look at how we don't become overwhelmed. And I want to look at this story this morning found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verses 40 to 48. And there's kind of two characters in this story. There's a guy named Jairus. Probably said the name wrong, but it sounds like Jairus in my head. That's right, I got it. Yes, look at me. Who said Americans can't talk right? Oh, got this. Not Jairus, and a bleeding woman. And I want to look at this story because I think there's something in this story that can help us when life gets messy. Even sometimes when that messiness is out of our control. And before we look at this story, I want to give you a little bit of context. So the Synoptic Gospels, if you've ever heard that term, that's about Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So basically, there's some collaboration with these three Gospels. And there's different debate around what happened. Most people believe Mark wrote his first, Matthew and Luke kind of used it, and then they might have used another source. But all three of these Gospels include the story connecting these two events. So they include Jairus' daughter and this bleeding woman together. So I think this did happen together. And I think the evidence is pretty clear there. The next thing is that Luke is the only one that includes it chronologically. Man, that's a hard word to say. I should have found a different word. Chronologically, with the crossing of the lake and storm, the Garrison Shore demonic healing, and the crossing the lake back. So basically, the way Luke tells it is he kind of tells a lot of things happening in one hit. So before this story, Jesus tells his disciples to get in a boat. A storm comes. He calms the storm. They get to the shore of where they're going, and there's this guy who's demon possessed. He's kind of chained up. And Jesus basically heals him, and all the demons go into pigs and then they run off a cliff, which I'm sure would be weird for people to see. So then you can imagine the place they just arrived is like, hey, you get out of here and go away. Go back on your boat. So Jesus does with the disciples and they go back. And then this is what happens next, what we're going to read about. And I think why I'm mentioning this stuff is Luke is sharing these miracles for the church, I think. I think they're directly for us as followers of Christ, something to give us hope, something to show us the power of Jesus, something to show us how Jesus is with us in the messy times. And I think Luke is doing this on purpose. So now let's look at the story a little bit together. And this is what we read in verses 40 to 42. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. Now, before we go on, this is a big moment. It's a big moment for lots of reasons. One is Jairus is a synagogue leader. If you don't know, that means he's in charge of the synagogue. He picks who reads what scroll. He's really well known in the community. He's got a lot of reputation, a lot of respect. So you see this man with great power and great influence coming to the feet of Jesus, begging for a healing. And I think when you see something like that, like any of us would, you can imagine everyone's like all eyes on the action, right? Like, have you ever noticed when I was driving yesterday up to speak at a conference, and it's funny to me, there was a cop that pulled someone over on the motorway, and I always laugh at how much people slow down to see what's going on, right? They slow down, everyone drives real slow, looks at them, trying to figure out what's going on. And I think that would have happened. The minute this really important thing happened, you had everyone slow down. This whole community. And Jesus has been busy doing miracles, so there's all attention, all eyes are on him, and you have this big moment happen. And the story goes on. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. Now I want to pause again and look at this woman that was bleeding. Because I think there's something interesting here. When we read crushed, it's really referring to like a wine press. So when you make wine, I think we all know what you have to do. You have to crush grapes, yeah? I think it's something like that, and then you let them get all fermented and stuff. Never made wine before, obviously. You can see that. But it's referring to that. So it means the crowds are so pressed in that like Jesus is getting crushed like a wine press. There's people everywhere. It's like Christmas shopping on steroids, right? Like you're like this and you're budging. And you have this woman who's been bleeding. Now, the kind of bleeding this woman has is what women have in their monthly cycles, but for this woman, it's never ending. It says for 12 years. And that means some things that we don't realize. I think in our society, it's a bit different. We don't frown on it. We don't exclude people. But in their culture, this woman was excluded. She was unclean. No one would go near her. Her friends and family were probably staying away from her. She's probably had this guy named Jairus kick her out of the synagogue and tell her not to come in the temple because she was bleeding. And I have to imagine if you were bleeding like that for 12 years in that time, you probably wouldn't care that much about how you looked towards the end, would you? So you got to think this woman's in a really bad place. And there's some desperation because she sees Jesus But not only does she see Jesus, she sees this crushing around him. She sees Christmas shopping on steroids, and she's like, yes, it's my chance. I can sneak in now. Because if she tried to say anything, she would have got shunned pretty quick. So she sneaks in when it's her moment, when there's this crushing happening, and Jesus is busy on his way. And let's read what happens. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. And immediately her bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. Wow. This is an important moment. It's an important moment for lots of reasons. A, this woman gets miraculously healed. You imagine for 12 years being excluded, having something out of your control that was messy and made people stay away from you, that stopped you from even going to church. And we read that all she does is touch the robe of Jesus, and then she's healed. And then I think something else that would have been important is I think this woman would have been trying to sneak off, right? She probably got this healing, and she's like, oh, yes. And then she heard Jesus go, who touched me? And she's like, oh, poop. Bad idea. Bad idea. How am I going to get out of this one? I'll just stay quiet. No, she stays quiet a little bit. Everyone's like, what are you talking about? Who's touching you? No one owns up to it. Peter, being the smart guy, is like, yo, Jesus, it's Christmas shopping on steroids. Like, what do you expect? Everyone's touching you right now. And Jesus is like, no, someone touched me and power went out from me. And I love even that because I think it even shows that it cost Jesus something. We sometimes think of Jesus as this genie who's just got endless power. That stuff doesn't cost him anything. But I think throughout the Gospels, we find out something different. And it's an important moment, too, because Jesus isn't done. And our story goes on, and we read in verse 47 to 48. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. And then he said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Daughter. Imagine being that woman, trying to get out of it, knowing that you're not supposed to touch anyone like that because you're unclean. And you come trembling before Jesus, this person that you believe is the Messiah, who's miraculously healed you, and you're trembling and you fall at his feet. And there's people all around who told you that you weren't good enough, that they weren't going to come near you. They're all looking, and you have to share your story. And you're trembling. And what does Jesus say to her? Daughter. Daughter. He restores her identity. Not only does he give her a healing where she can slip away, but he restores her individuality and who she is as a person. And I think it's really big because if we look in Luke's gospel, this is one of the only times Jesus calls someone daughter. And it's this woman who was bleeding, who was unclean. Other gospel accounts talk about how this woman has spent all of her money. She basically tried to go to every doctor. And I think we can resonate with that. Because I've seen people who are unwell, who have tried every option that they know. They go to naturopath, physio, they've done it all. And nothing seems to help. this is how this woman is feeling. Her life is messy and it's out of her control. And Jesus doesn't only heal her, he restores her status. He basically tells her when he calls her daughters that you're enough. You're enough. But in that, you're more than enough. I didn't want you to just sneak and get this healing and sneak away. I want people to know you're enough. And I think that's big. And I think what this story shows me is when life gets messy, we need to remember you're never too messy. We sometimes have this idea in Christianity that if we've gone too far or if life gets too messy and overcomplicated, then obviously we're too messy and we need to clean stuff up. I mean, I could not even count on all my hands and toes the amount of people over the years that I've told I'm a pastor, and pretty soon on they say, oh, I'd love to go to church, but I got to get my life cleaned up first. What? Where does that idea come from? But even we have it as Christians, right? If our life gets really messy, what's something we stop doing? We stop going to church. We stop going to our Bible studies. We stop going to our Christian friends because we feel like we're too messy. We're a bit icky, so then we hide away. And I think this story really tells me that isn't the case. We're never too messy. So we need to remember that. And then we also need to remember that you are enough for Christ. So let him into your mess. Because we'll be surprised with what he does. When we let down the walls, when we are inviting God into every part of our being, even the messy stuff. And when we have this idea that we're enough. I mean, funny enough, I'll tell you guys this, now you'll know my secret. One of my biggest struggles is talking in front of people. It's funny because that's what I do a lot of now. Yesterday I had to go run an elective and talk in front of 30 people. And something funnily enough that I do every time is I try to find a mirror before I talk. And I look in this mirror, smile at myself, and I tell myself I'm enough. And I imagine that's what God's telling me. So I don't just say it like I'm boosting my own ego. I say it like I'm trying to see myself as God sees me. And it's something that really helps. It's something that changes and helps me do what God's called me to do at different points. And I really want us to take this on board. So when life gets messy, let's remember it's never too messy for God. And that we're enough for Christ. So let him into the mess and see what he'll do. Because God could do amazing restorations of our mess. And it might look like something we didn't expect, something we didn't plan for. But God can do miracles. We just have to let him in. And when we let him in, we got to realize that he's not coming in picking us apart. He's not watching us trying to clean up the mess. Or, let's say when I was breaking my friend's tiles, I did really good on a couple. I got so excited. He said, don't take whatever the wall stuff is after, that you glue tiles on. I had to. No, like the wall. He didn't want me to put a hole in the wall. So I'm trying to chip off this tile. Yeah, there you go. That stuff. Man, I got 3 tiles in a row. Perfect. The whole tile came off. I was feeling good. Yes, I got this. So I tried to speed up. Next couple tiles were not as good. But what's funny is my friend didn't stand over my shoulder the whole time. He didn't come beat me up when I messed up on the 3 tiles. And I think that's what we got to realize Jesus does for us when we invite him into the mess. He comes in there and he supports us. He doesn't look over our shoulder and say, I wouldn't do that. No, he's there with us. He comes into the mess and he sits with us. He holds space for us. He waits till we're ready to hear something from him. And I think we have to remember that when life gets messy so we can have some restoration this year.